flag on the tail, the stripe around the fuselage, and the telltale bubble just behind the 747 cockpit area.
There are many commercial versions of the 747, obviously, that look similar, but I don't know any of them that have the communications pod like the E-4, the Air Force E-4 does behind the cockpit.
The E-4B is a state-of-the-art flying command post, built and equipped for one reason: to keep the government running no matter what, even in the event of a nuclear war. The reason it was nicknamed the Doomsday Plane during the Cold War. Ask the Pentagon, and it insists this is not a military aircraft, and there is no mention of it in the official report of the 9/11 Commission. Commission co-chairman Lee Hamilton says he has a vague recollection of someone mentioning a mystery plane, but staffers who looked into it never raised it as a relevant issue.
Number 6. 3 F-16s assigned to Andrews Air Force Base, 10 miles from Washington, D.C., are conducting training exercises in North Carolina, 207 miles away from the first plane crashes into the World Trade Center. Now, even at significantly less than their top speed of 1,500 miles per hour, they could still have defended the skies over Washington, D.C. well before 9 a.m. More than 37 minutes before Flight 77 crashes into the Pentagon. However, they did not return until after 9:55 a.m. Andrews Air Force Base had no armed fighters on alert and ready to take off on the morning of 9/11. Number 7, World Trade Center Building 7. Number 8, Flight 93 is the 4th plane to crash on 9/11 at 10:03 a.m. Vice President Cheney only gives the shoot-down orders at 10:10 to 10:20 a.m., and this is not communicated to NORAD until 28 minutes after Flight 93's crashed. Fueling further suspicion on this front is the fact that 3 months before the 9/11 attacks, Dick Cheney usurped control of NORAD, and therefore he, and no one else on planet Earth, had the power to call the military sorties on the hijacked airliners on 9/11. He didn't exercise that power. 3 months after 9/11, he relinquished command of NORAD and returned it to military operation. Number 9. Scores of mainstream news outlets reported that the FBI conducted an investigation of at least 5 of the 9/11 hijackers being trained at U.S. military flight schools. Now, those investigations are now sealed and need to be declassified. Number 10. In 2004, New York firefighters Mike Ballone and Nicholas DeMasi went public to say that they had found the black boxes at the World Trade Center but were told to keep their mouths shut by FBI agents. Nicholas DeMasi said that he was escorted by federal agents on an all-terrain vehicle in October 2001 and helped them locate the devices, a story backed up by rescue volunteer Mike Ballone. As the Philadelphia Daily News reported at the time, quote, "Their story raises the question of whether there was some sort of cover-up at Ground Zero." Number 11, hundreds of eyewitnesses, including first responders, fire captains, news reporters, police, all described multiple explosions in both towers before and even during the collapse. Number 12, an astounding video uncovered from the archive shows BBC News correspondent Jane Stanley.
Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost a sense downtown in New York.
Tapes from earlier BBC broadcasts show news anchors discussing the collapse of World Trade Center 7 a full 26 minutes in advance. The BBC at first claimed that their tapes from 9/11 had been lost before admitting that they had made the error of reporting the collapse of World Trade Center 7 before it happened without adequately explaining how they could have obtained advanced knowledge of the event. In addition, over an hour before the collapse of World Trade Center 7 at 4:10 p.m., CNN's Aaron Brown reported that the building has either collapsed or is collapsing.
One of the other buildings, Building 7, in the World Trade Center complex, is on fire and has either collapsed or is collapsing.
Number 13, Solicitor General Ted Olson's claim that his wife Barbara Olson called him twice from Flight 77 describing hijackers with box cutters was a central plank of the official 9/11 story. However, the credibility of the story was completely undermined after Olson kept changing his story about whether his wife used her cell phone or the airplane phone. Now, American Airlines confirmed that Flight 77 was a Boeing 757 and that this plane did not have airplane phones on board. And according to the FBI, Barbara Olson attempted to call her husband only once and the call failed to connect. Now, therefore, Olson must have been lying when he claimed that he had spoken to his wife from Flight 77. Number 14. The size of a Boeing 757 is approximately 125 feet in width, and yet images of the impact zone at the Pentagon, supposedly caused by the crash, merely show a hole no more than 16 feet in diameter. Now, the engines of the 757 would have punctured a hole bigger than this, never mind the whole plane, and images before the partial collapse of the impact zone show little real impact damage and a sparse debris field, completely inconsistent with the crash of a large jetliner, especially when contrasted with other images showing airplane crashes into buildings. And number 15. What is the meaning behind the following quote attributed to Dick Cheney, which came to light during the 9/11 Commission hearings? The passage is taken from testimony given by the Secretary of Transportation, Norman Mineta.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?
As the plane was not shot down, and in addition to the fact that the armed fighter jets were nowhere near the plane and the Pentagon defense system was not activated, are we to take it that the orders were to let the plane find its target? Number 16, in May 2003, the Miami Herald reported how the Bush administration was refusing to release a 900-page congressional report on 9/11 because it wanted to avoid enshrining embarrassing details in the report, particularly regarding pre-9/11 warnings, as well as the fact that the hijackers were trained at U.S. flight schools. Number 17, top Pentagon officials canceled their scheduled flights for September 11th on September 10th. San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown, following a security warning for the White House, canceled a flight into New York that was scheduled for the morning of 9/11. Number 18, the technology to enable cell phone calls from high-altitude airline flights was not created until 2004. And even by that point, it was only in a trial phase. So calls from cell phones, which formed an integral part of the official government version of the events, were technologically impossible at that time. Number 19, on April 29, 2004, President Bush and Vice President Cheney would only meet with the commission under specific clandestine conditions. Now, they insisted on testifying together and not under oath. They also demanded that their testimony be treated as a matter of state secret. To date, nothing they spoke of that day exists in the public domain. And finally, Mr. President, number 20. A few days after the attack, several newspapers, as well as the FBI, reported that a paper passport had been found in the ruins of the World Trade Center. In August 2004, CNN reported that 9/11 hijacker Ziad Jarrah's visa was found in the remains of Flight 93, which went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Now, at least a third of the World Trade Center victims' bodies were vaporized, and many of the victims of the Pentagon incident were burned beyond recognition. And yet visas and, paper passports and, which identify the perpetrators and back up the official version of events, miraculously survive explosions and fires that we were all told melted steel buildings.
Well, Charlie, you can't say this hasn't been interesting. Regardless of how I feel about the material you've presented, I must commend your dedication and zeal. However, our time here is up.